Welcome to my channel, The Untamed Savior. The silence was the only thing louder than the wind across the Montana Badlands. 11-year-old Caleb existed inside it, a soundproof chamber built of shock and grief since the accident that took his mother and his voice 6 months prior. He traced a scar above his lip, a pale, thin line that felt like a permanent seal on his throat. He lived on his grandfather's remote ranch, the Barren, a place where survival was etched into the worn wood and dusty horizon. The hook wasn't the silence, though. It was a raw, terrifying noise that tore it open. It happened near the dilapidated North Corral, a frantic, primal shriek. Caleb paused, his heart a frantic metronome against his ribs. His grandfather, Silas, was yelling a low, frustrated roar. Caleb crept closer, hiding behind the rusted water tank. In the corral was Ignis. She was a Mustang, caught only a week ago, a creature of pure, unbroken obsidian shadow, her coat dark as burnt wood, her mane like wild smoke. They called her Wildfire, not just for her color, but for the untamable spirit that promised ruin. Ignis was thrashing, a magnificent, terrifying dance of survival. Her eyes, wide and black, were pools of deep, unreasoning fear. She had kicked through a section of the railing, splintering the aged pine. The men, hardened wranglers, were circling her with ropes and grim faces, their intent clear: break her. Caleb saw the man's heavy hand rise, and his own breath hitched, a silent, familiar ache in his chest. That moment, the threat of pain, the sheer, helpless terror in the mare's flaring nostrils, pulled Caleb out of his own psychological retreat. This wasn't just a horse. It was a mirror, a spirit trapped, broken, refusing to yield. He stepped out from the shadows. The wind dropped. The men froze. Ignis stopped thrashing, her head snapping up. She was breathing ragged, heavy, hot. Her eyes met Caleb's. Loneliness stared at loneliness. The men shouted at him to get back, but Caleb didn't hear them. He took one step closer to the broken railing. The Mustang trembled, ready to charge. Caleb lowered his gaze, exposed his own neck in a gesture of absolute, unarmed surrender. The mare watched, her breath rattling. Caleb was strictly forbidden from going near the Mustang, but the silent covenant was already struck. He began a routine, an obsession that replaced the numb emptiness of his days. He didn't bring feed or a rope. He brought his presence. Every day at dusk, he would sit exactly 20 feet from her broken corral, cross-legged, the dry dust sticking to his worn denim. He brought his sketchbook and drew the mare. He drew her strength, her fear, the wild arch of her neck. He was not trying to tame her. He was trying to see her. Ignis was a master of mistrust. She would pin her ears, turn her back, or stand stone still, radiating pure, coiled danger. Her trauma was evident in every twitch, a deep, cellular memory of betrayal. Caleb's own psychological arc was starting. He wasn't grieving the loss of his voice. He was actively using his silence as a tool. His inability to speak became his strength. He posed no threat, only stillness. He taught himself horse psychology, reading the flick of an ear, the weight on a back hoof, the tension in the muzzle. One evening, a week into this vigil, a thunderclap cracked the distant horizon. Ignis launched into a panicked frenzy, slamming herself into the remaining sturdy railings. The ranch hands had left early. Caleb was alone. He stood up slowly, keeping his body soft, and hummed a single low, off-key note, the only sound he felt safe making. He didn't move forward. He just kept humming a resonant, steady vibration against a growing storm. Ignis flinched, then listened. The terror in her eyes lessened, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. She was dependent on her instinct, and her instinct was momentarily confused. This small, silent human was not running. This small, silent human was an anchor. The true turning point came with the pain. Ignis had snagged her flank on a broken wire during one of her nightly escapes, a deep, ugly tear that became infected in the heat. She was limping badly. Silas was ready to call the vet and administer a heavy sedative just to get close. Caleb knew that sedation, to Ignis's trauma, would feel like a final captivity. Ignoring the wranglers, Caleb walked into the corral. His heart hammered a brutal rhythm against his ribs. He felt the pure, desperate survival instinct of the mare radiating off her in waves. Ignis flared, ready to kill him. Her teeth were bared, a savage snarl warning. Caleb stopped 5 feet away. He did not look at her eyes, but at the wound. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small dried apple slice. He held it out, not pushing it, just letting it exist in the space between them. He waited. Minutes stretched. Ignis was breathing fire, her massive body tense. Caleb started to cry. Silent tears, streaming down his dusty cheeks, not for himself, but for her pain, for the raw, unfair brokenness they both shared. He made a low, choking sound, a sound that wasn't a word, but a pure expression of empathy. Ignis saw the tears. The primal, predatory tension in her body wavered. She lowered her head, sniffing the air, the scent of the apple, and the overwhelming scent of a fellow creature in distress. Slowly, agonizingly, she took one step, then another. She lowered her muzzle and gently licked the apple from his palm. Her breath on his skin was warm, a shocking transfer of trust. She allowed him to take a clean cloth and dab at the wound. No halter, no rope, just a gift of stillness. That night, Caleb slept outside the corral. Ignis slept too, her back to him, not standing guard, but resting. Hope felt like the clean scent of the high mountain air after a dust storm. The fragile bond faced a cruel emotional speed bump. 3 days later, Ignis's wound was healing beautifully, and she was following Caleb like a shadow. Silas, seeing the miraculous change, made a terrible, practical mistake. He saw a tamed horse, not a trusting one. He decided it was time to saddle her for the first time. While Caleb was fetching water, Silas led the mare out of corral, gentle but firm. Ignis was calm. But when the worn, dusty leather saddle came down on her back, the weight was not just leather. It was the entire crushing weight of her trauma. She exploded. The saddle hit the dirt. Ignis reared, her screams a tearing sound that brought Caleb running. She didn't look at Silas. She looked straight at Caleb, her eyes blazing with betrayal. You brought me safety, and then you allowed the chains. She didn't try to escape. She tried to vanish. She charged, not at the men, but past them, disappearing into the vast, unforgiving maze of canyons and alkali flats. Caleb stood there, silent and motionless, feeling the immense weight of guilt, the failure of his promise. His grandfather tried to comfort him, but Caleb pulled away, the loss of Ignis feeling like the second, final death of his own spirit. Loneliness was not just an absence of sound. It was the absence of that wild, dark heart that understood him. He mounted his old pony, Dust, and rode out without telling anyone. He was leaving the safety of the ranch for the rising danger of the wild. The sun was sinking, bathing the canyons in deceptive, bleeding red when Caleb finally found her, deep within the Devil's Tooth Gorge, a treacherous box canyon. Ignis was huddled against the sheer rock face, shivering. It wasn't the mare's presence that stopped Caleb, but the sky, above the canyons. The air had turned a sickly, bruised purple. A massive, churning storm, the kind that brought flash floods that could scour the land clean in minutes, was bearing down. He dismounted and walked toward her. This was the reckoning. Ignis flattened her ears, her warning clear. Stay back. Her breathing was shallow. She was exhausted, but still fighting. Caleb knew he couldn't force her. He needed her to choose belonging over survival. He sat down in the path of the storm, turning his back on her, a final, complete vulnerability. He opened his throat and forced a sound, not the hum, but the raw, unpolished, agonizing sound of a child in pain. It was a choked sob, the sound of his grief finally cracking the silence. The sound shocked Ignis. She took a step, then another. She nudged the back of his head with her muzzle, a question, not an attack. Caleb pressed his forehead against her wet, shivering flank. "Please," he whispered, a guttural, barely audible sound. "Please, we have to go. It's coming." The first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Ignis made her choice. She turned, placing herself between Caleb and the gorge wall, offering her flank as a shield. He grabbed her mane, and they moved, Dust following close behind, the mare now leading them out of the narrowing canyon. The storm hit with the fury of 1,000 unleashed demons. Rain fell in solid sheets, and the canyon floor turned instantly into a raging, silk-brown river. The water was rising faster than they could run. They reached a narrow, slippery path leading up the canyon ridge, the only escape. Thus, the pony stumbled, panicked by the sheer force of the current that was now ankle-deep on the trail. Caleb was holding tight to Ignis's mane, her body a powerful, steady presence against the chaos. But the water, now at their knees, was ferocious. A massive, waterlogged cedar log came slamming down the current toward them. Ignis saw it coming. She didn't hesitate. She slammed her body sideways, pushing Caleb and Dust hard against the canyon wall, absorbing the brutal impact of the log on her own side. A cry, high and sharp, tore from her throat, not of fear, but of raw sacrifice. She stumbled, her legs buckling, the water instantly trying to drag her down. Caleb felt the world tilt into slow motion. He saw the sheer courage in her struggle, the deep, selfless love. He knew if he stayed on her back, he might be safe, but she would fall. He let go of her mane, plunging into the frigid, churning current. He was immediately swept away, tumbling over rocks, his lungs screaming. Ignis, relieved of the weight, found her footing. She looked back and saw the small, mute boy being swallowed by the flood. Her fear vanished. There was only one instinct: rescue. She launched herself after him, a dark, unstoppable projectile against the brown, churning water. She reached him, her massive head dipping down. Caleb, barely conscious, grabbed the thick leather of her bridle. He held on as she fought the current, pulling him, dragging him, carrying him toward the high, safe ground, the ridge. They reached the ridge crest minutes later, collapsing together onto the slick, muddy earth. The storm raged around them, but they were safe. Ignis was shaking, a large, ragged scrape marring her hip from the cedar log. Caleb was coughing up water, freezing, but alive. He lay there, his head resting against her soaking wet flank, listening to her immense, panicked heartbeat slowly return to a steady, powerful rhythm. In that moment of raw survival, the final seal on his heart cracked. He had seen her sacrifice everything. She had given her trust, and now her life, for him. He needed to tell her thank you. He needed to tell her he was sorry. He needed to tell her he loved her. The words, the true, agonizing words he had hidden for 6 months, finally found their way through the scar, past the grief, past the fear. Ignis, he choked out, his voice a raw, sandpaper whisper that sounded alien and terrifying in the open air. The sound hurt. The sound was real. Ignis turned her great, dark head and nudged him gently, her eyes soft, her breathing deep. I miss them, Mom. So much, he whispered, the sentences coming in jagged, painful bursts. But you saved me. You saved us. Silas found them an hour later, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the exhausted eyes of the mare. He saw the boy, soaked and scarred, but finally, miraculously, speaking. He didn't ask what happened. He simply saw the two broken souls, now whole together. The ranch was quieter now. The wranglers no longer called Ignis Wildfire, but Shadow. The corral stood repaired, but she was rarely in it. The final element of their bond was freedom. Caleb, healed by her courage, understood her need for space. He would ride her, not with bitter tight rein, but with a rope around her neck, guiding her by the energy of his own body, his commands now clear and soft. One perfect, sun-drenched autumn morning, Caleb rode Ignis deep into grasslands. They stopped by a small stream where wild mustangs often grazed. He dismounted and wrapped his arm around her strong, velvety neck. "Go," he whispered, his voice still soft, but steady now, a miracle unfolding in every syllable. "You're free. You've earned it." Ignis looked at him. She lowered her head and nudged his chest. She walked a few steps toward the distant herd, a slight hesitation in her gait. Then she stopped, turned, and trotted back, pressing her head into his shoulder. She had chosen him. Her captivity was his belonging. Her freedom wasn't from him. It was with him. Caleb mounted her, and they turned back toward the ranch. His arc was complete. The mute, broken boy had found his voice and his purpose in the wild heart of a fearful horse. Ignis's arc was also complete. The terrified, broken Mustang had found safety and purpose in the gentle, speaking touch of the human. They rode back under the immense, endless sky, no longer two lonely figures, but one unstoppable shadow moving across the earth. The scar on Caleb's lip remained, but it was no longer a seal on his silence. It was a reminder of the storm, the sacrifice, and the day his voice was resurrected by a wild, dark heart. He never knew if she was truly a wildfire, but he knew for certain she was a salvation,